Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Happy Vlogmas Day 20. So I thought today I would do a Q&A just to switch it up, and I pulled some questions from my YouTube comments, also TikTok. I thought I would just answer them here. So let's get into it. So for context, if anyone is new to my channel, I was diagnosed with uterine embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma back in January, and this whole year I have been going through chemotherapy, radiation, and I've also had multiple surgeries, one to remove the tumor, a hysterectomy, and also a oophoropexy. I'll get into that when I answer some of the questions, but just for context, if you are new to my channel. The first question that I want to answer was one that I had on my TikTok, and somebody asked what my first signs and symptoms were and how I found out that I had this cancer. So actually backtrack to August of 2020. I was on birth control to try and regulate my period because I was having very irregular, very painful, intense periods for most of my teenage years. So I decided that I wanted to try birth control to try and help regulate it, but it wasn't helping. It was actually making my Myasthenia Gravis, which is the autoimmune disease that I have, it seemed to be making those symptoms worse. And towards the end, I was starting to bleed on the pills that you're not supposed to bleed on, so I came off of that. And when I did, my family doctor told me that my period would normalize in the next few months. It would take a couple of months for my body to basically reset. So I was having pretty regular periods after getting off of birth control, but they were very, very painful periods. And in between periods, I would have this continuous brown discharge coming out that had a very foul smell. And so in November, I went to my family doctor again, and she did a vaginal swab and also an ultrasound. The ultrasound came back, there was nothing. The ultrasound was clear, but the swab came back and it said that I had a very severe bacterial vaginosis infection. So she gave me this antibiotic called phlogistatin, and after that cycle of antibiotics, the discharge was still there. It hadn't resolved, so I did another round of antibiotics. On January 4th, I thought I was getting my period. I was having very, very intense pain, and no over-the-counter medication was helping with that, and I was bleeding, and I was bleeding so heavily that I was going through overnight pads every 10 minutes. So that's what prompted me to go to the hospital. And then if you've watched my diagnosis story, that will tell you how I found out, but those were my symptoms that I had. And also I was having trouble urinating, which is actually another sign of embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma. It can be. And I just learned that within the past couple of months, but I did have trouble with that. Then someone else on TikTok asked, did your doctor ever give you an ultrasound or transvaginal ultrasound, and did it show the cancer? So yes, I eventually had a transvaginal ultrasound. The third time I went to emergency, I got a transvaginal ultrasound, but because the tumor had inverted my uterus, it was very hard to see anything. So basically I got the transvaginal ultrasound. They weren't able to tell anything, so then I had to have a CT scan. So to answer that question, no, it didn't show cancer, and they didn't know it was cancer even when they removed the tumor. They had to send it away for pathology, and that's when they found out that it was cancer. And then somebody asked, did they leave your ovaries? How does the hysterectomy affect you being so young? So yes, they did leave my ovaries. Thankfully, the cancer didn't spread to my ovaries or anything, but they did take my fallopian tubes out and my uterus and all that stuff. They kept my ovaries. So I did fertility treatments, and after the fertility treatments I had a surgery which was called an oophoropexy, and that's where they move your, like, they relocate your ovaries. So one of my ovaries is under my liver, and then one is above my large intestine on the other side. So they did that to move my ovaries out of the field of radiation, because I also had pelvic radiation, and if my ovaries would have gotten radiated, then I would have definitely gone into menopause right then and there. So the other part of the question was, how does the hysterectomy affect you being so young? So I would say it would be more the chemo and the radiation would impact me going into menopause. I assume that I will eventually go into menopause a lot sooner than most women, just because I've had a hysterectomy, but they have been very cautious, like I said, with moving my ovaries, and then also with the chemotherapy that I'm on, they are still not sure how good my ovaries are functioning, and my oncologist told me that they won't know how they're functioning until I finish chemotherapy, so that'll be a later thing that they will look into. Yeah, they've taken a lot of precautions in preventing menopause, early onset menopause, because yes, that can have a lot of health complications, especially if you go into menopause at a very young age. And then the next sort of question was questions around my recovery after my hysterectomy and how that went. So I had a emergency surgery first to remove the tumor, and at that point so my uterus had inverted from the tumor, and so they were gonna keep my uterus intact because at that point they didn't think it was cancer. The instant pathology that they did was inconclusive, so again, they didn't want to remove my uterus unless it was very necessary. So they ended up stitching up my uterus, and they had to actually cut me open. So I do have like a C-section incision. And they were trying to do it laparoscopically, but the tumor was way too large. So that is why they had to fully cut me open. And that recovery was a lot, and the pain was a lot. So that compared to the hysterectomy they were able to do laparoscopically. They would have sent me home the day of the surgery, like right after I had the surgery, but because of my myasthenia gravis, and I've had complications with anesthesia in the past with my myasthenia gravis and muscle weakness and everything, they kept me overnight just to monitor me in that regard. But other than that, I would say that the recovery from the hysterectomy was a lot better than that first surgery, and I don't remember the recovery period being too long. Now, I did have 2 surgeries pretty close together, so my first surgery was January 14th and then the hysterectomy was February 10th, so a little less than a month apart, so that could also have contributed. But in my experience, the recovery wasn't too bad from the hysterectomy. So then another question I got on TikTok was, what type of chemotherapy do I get? So when I had first gotten this question, I was still on the old regimen of chemotherapy, so I thought I would just go over the different types of chemotherapy that I've been on and that I'm currently on. So when I started, I was on a regimen called VAC. So it was 3 different chemotherapy drugs: vincristine, actinomycin, and cyclophosphamide, and I would get that once every 3 weeks. And then when things started, when my body couldn't really handle that chemotherapy, we switched to a maintenance chemotherapy. So now I'm on oral cyclophosphamide and IV vinorelbine, and I take the oral cyclophosphamide every day for 3 weeks, and then I get 1 week off. And then the vinorelbine is IV, so I would go to the hospital once a week for 3 weeks and then get a week off, and that regimen is for 6 months. But as most of you probably know from my past videos, that the IV vinorelbine has been canceled quite a few times because of how low my platelets have been. I am still on the oral cyclophosphamide. It's just the IV I sometimes have to skip because of my blood work. And then somebody else asked, what was radiation like? Was it painful? Does it make you sick like chemotherapy? And I might do a whole video on my radiation experience later down the road if people are interested. But I will say that my radiation experience was quite different, just because there's different time frames that people can have chemotherapy, and I had more of a both chemotherapy and radiation at the same time, where I know most people either have chemotherapy and then they have radiation, or they have half chemotherapy, radiation, and then the rest of their chemotherapy, like a sandwich. But they decided to do chemotherapy and radiation at the same time, and my body couldn't handle that, and I got an infection 3 weeks into radiation. So we had to put a pause on the radiation for 1 week, but I did finish radiation, and I would just say that the only side effects that I had from the radiation specifically was fatigue was the worst, and I would say the last 2 weeks the fatigue was the absolute worst, and by the last week I was just ready to be done. And they told me that going in, that that's what a lot of people experience, that the first couple of weeks they kind of feel okay, and then especially like the last 2 weeks is when it really starts to accumulate and it hits you. I am doing a lot better now. I did have a lot of extended fatigue after the radiation for a few months, but now I'm feeling a lot better with regards to that kind of fatigue. And the fatigue was just like an all-over consuming fatigue. And then the other thing was, and then this might be a little bit TMI, but I did have more frequent bowel movements, but they said that that was because I had pelvic radiation, so it was down that area where your digestive tract is and everything. So if the radiation hits that a little bit, then you can have more frequent bowel movements. There was also a chance that I could have had diarrhea, but I didn't have diarrhea, and I think that's because they got me to drink a lot of water. I had to fill my bladder every day for radiation to push up my intestines so that they wouldn't be in the straight field of radiation. So I think that that helped a lot with those type of side effects. But other than that, I think the one main thing was fatigue for me. And I know if you're having radiation in different spots, there are different side effects, and mine was a very deep tissue radiation, so I didn't experience any burns. I do know that some people do experience that if it's like on the very surface levels. I didn't have that though. So also, one of you asked me if I have ever done a personality test and what were the results. So I commented and I said I would do a personality test and answer this question in the Q&A, so that is what I did. And I took the 16 personalities quiz. It's like a free one. I think that's one of the most popular ones, but my personality type is Defender, so the letters are ISFJ-T. So I'll just read a little bit of what it said that this personality type means. So it says the Defender personality type is quite unique, as many of their qualities defy the definition of their individual traits. Though sensitive, Defenders have excellent analytical abilities. Though reserved, they have well-developed people skills and robust social relationships. And though they are generally a conservative type, Defenders are often receptive to change and new ideas. As with so many things, people with the Defender personality type are more than the sum of their parts, and it is the way they use their strengths that defines who they are. Combining the best of tradition and the desire to do good, Defenders are found in lines of work with a sense of history behind them, such as medicine, academics, and charitable social work. So then it goes into strengths and weaknesses, romantic relationship, friendships, parenthood, career paths, workplace habits, and etc. So if you want to do this quiz, I will leave it linked down below, but I thought that was cool because a lot of the things that this said really resonated with me, and I feel like I have a lot of these personality traits. So I especially resonated with some of the weaknesses. For example, humble and shy. I am a pretty shy person, even though I do have this YouTube channel and it looks like I'm very extroverted. I am very introverted, but when I get to know people, I really make connections with people. And then also it says one of the weaknesses is take things too personally. I am a very sensitive person. Overloading themselves, I tend to do that. Reluctant to change, which I talked about in one of my other videos. I am very reluctant to change, and I have a hard time with change. I thought that was really interesting, and I actually had fun doing that. And then the last set of questions I thought I would answer are some non-cancer related questions. I really like what this one person said about always feeling like you're talking about your health, and there is a lot more to me other than my cancer story and my health and everything. I know that's why I started my YouTube channel and my Instagram page and my TikTok and everything, but I am a person and I have other things too. And even when I'm done with cancer treatments and I am deemed cancer free, I am planning on continuing to share my story and everything with my life. And yeah, I thought it was just nice of her to say that, and she also had some questions to ask me. So one of the questions is, do you have any hobbies? So I love to do crafting, as we can see if you've watched a lot of my videos. Also, I really love being in the kitchen, cooking, baking, coming up with new recipes, trying new recipes, making things a little bit more nutritious and all that kind of stuff. And also I am really enjoying reading. When I was younger, I was a pretty good reader, like I would read a lot. But I think once I got into like grade 5 and up, I started to not read as frequently. And then in high school and university, it was kind of, I would go in bouts of reading and then just not read. But I think since I was diagnosed, I have found a lot of comfort in reading and being able to escape. And also because I'm taking this year off of school, I really want to keep my brain fresh and working, basically, because I am having a lot of difficulties at time with like brain fog and that kind of stuff. Chemo brain comes with treatment, so I think reading has been really helping exercise my brain, and it's also just kind of fun to do, to read a story, and then when you're done reading a book, you feel accomplished. So those are just some of my hobbies. I love this question. What would be your ideal job? So I've talked about this a little bit on my channel before. So before I was diagnosed, literally the month before I was diagnosed, I got accepted into naturopathic medical school, and I was on my way to start that in September that just passed, but because of all my treatments and everything, I've had to put that on hold, and I deferred until next September. So when I finish school, my ideal dream job is to one day open a clinic for cancer patients and people with chronic illnesses, autoimmune diseases and that kind of thing. And I really want to help them thrive. And I have some other ideas too of making connections with other healthcare providers such as physiotherapists, counselors, basically have like a whole net of healthcare professionals that I can contact to help my patients really have that well-rounded team, and to really all of us help them thrive, because that has been such a goal for me, is with my health and everything, is I want to thrive and I want to help other people thrive. And I think there's so many different factors to health, and health is so complex that I think having such a well-rounded team for each of my patients is definitely a goal that I have. And then also I would really love to have an extension of my practice where I can teach different classes, like maybe some cooking classes to help my patients, because I know that a lot of times that can be a barrier if you're not super comfortable in the kitchen. That can be a barrier of trying to eat a little bit healthier or just stuff like that. So I really want to be able to educate my patients and to empower them as well. So that is my ideal job. And then also I would have YouTube and that kind of stuff to further help others that wouldn't really be able to come to me specifically to work one-on-one. And yeah, that's basically the goal. And I also do want to write a book one day, so I'm hoping to do that. I'm hoping to write a book about my experience, my journey, and then maybe one day a cookbook or something like that. I think that'd be really cool. And then Another question, toilet paper on top or bottom? So I would say the toilet paper is like this. I personally like to pull it from the top, I guess, because this would be the bottom, right? So I pull it from the top. The last question is, how are you doing? And I am referring to your inside voice, not about how your body is feeling. I feel pretty good. I do feel like I have very high highs and very low lows, and that's also one of the reasons why I'm seeing a psychiatrist, because I think it's just so important to get on top of that and to have someone to not only talk to but also give you coping mechanisms and that kind of stuff when you're in those really low lows. And as of right now, I think I'm doing pretty good. The holidays are kind of stressful for, I know, a lot of people, and I'm feeling a little bit stressed too. And just with everything, all the changes that has happened with my health and my overall plan, and now seeing the hematologist and changing my medications for my myasthenia gravis, it's put a lot on me and a lot of stress, but I really try to keep myself busy and do things that I enjoy doing, so I'm not constantly thinking about those things. And I think for the most part I do a pretty good job of that. But thank you so much for asking me how I am personally doing. I think it's a hard question to answer just because I feel like my mood especially fluctuates, and some days things will bother me that other days it won't bother me as much, if that makes sense. Overall, I would say I'm doing pretty good. I am staying positive, but I think we all just have those days where no matter what, you just can't feel positive and you just gotta cry. And this past year is probably the year that I've cried the most, but it has been super healing to get it out. And yeah, it's okay to cry and it's okay to have a bad day. So that is all the questions that I'm going to answer in this video. Thank you so much to everyone who sent me in questions. I really appreciate it, and maybe down the road in a while I'll do another one of these if you like this. But if you do like this video, please give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you're not already. I would love to have you here. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video, which will be tomorrow.